The price of legacy. The crystalline spires of the Astrian palace pierced the lavender clouds like ancient daggers, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 setting suns. Queen Nyara stood at her observatory window, her iridescent skin dimmed to a pale blue, a telling sign of her distress. Below, the capital city of Lamaria sprawled in concentric rings of light and shadow, its citizens unaware of the turmoil about to unfold in their royal house. "The council has made their decision," King Varric's voice cut through the silence. He stood in the doorway, his ceremonial armor absorbing and refracting light in complex patterns that once made Nyara's heart flutter. Now, they only reminded her of the cold, unyielding nature of their people's traditions. Nyara's fingers traced the intricate patterns etched into her viewing scope, a wedding gift from Varric centuries ago. "And you've made yours," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging within. "The bloodline must continue." Varric moved closer, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. 500 years, Nyara. We've tried for 500 years. The word stung like acid rain on bare skin. Nyara had endured countless treatments, subjected herself to experimental procedures, and consulted healers from every corner of the known galaxy. Each failure had carved another scar into her soul, invisible but deep. "The geneticists say there's still hope," she whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. The latest reports had confirmed what they'd feared: her genetic structure was deteriorating, a rare condition that affected 1 in a million Astrians. Varric's hand hovered near her shoulder but never made contact. "The Empire needs an heir. The people need stability. You've seen the signs of unrest in the outer colonies." Nyara turned to face him, her height matching his, their eyes level. In his face, she saw the same features she'd fallen in love with a millennium ago: the sharp angles, the luminescent markings that traced his cheekbones, the deep purple eyes. But where there had once been warmth, now there was only duty. "And what of our vows?" she challenged. "What of the promise we made before the 3 moons? Vows must sometimes bow to necessity." He withdrew a crystal sphere from his robes, the orb of dissolution. Its presence made the air heavy with finality. Nyara's hands clenched at her sides. "You would cast me out? After everything we've built together? The law is clear. A royal marriage that cannot produce an heir must be dissolved. The council has been generous, they've granted you sanctuary in the outer reaches rather than exile beyond the Empire's borders." The outer reaches, a vast territory of failed colonies and abandoned outposts. A graveyard of dreams where the Empire sent its unwanted. Nyara felt her power surge with her anger, causing the nearby instruments to vibrate. "Generous?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "They fear my influence too much to send me further. They worry I might seek allies among our enemies." Varric's expression hardened. "Would you?" The question hung between them like a drawn blade. Nyara looked past him to the holographic display showing their empire, countless stars and systems, all bound by laws as ancient as the space between them. "I have served this empire faithfully for 1,000 years, she said finally. "I've negotiated treaties, prevented wars, built alliances. I've given everything to our people except the one thing they demand above all else." "And that is why you must go," Varric replied softly. "Your achievements make this harder. The people love you, but they need to forget. My new marriage must not be overshadowed by your memory." Already speaking of her in the past tense. Already planning his next union. Nyara felt something break inside her, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she drew herself up, summoning every lesson in royal bearing she'd learned over her centuries of rule. "Then let it be done properly." She held out her hand. "Give me the orb." Varric hesitated, then placed the crystal sphere in her palm. Its surface was cold, hungry. Nyara lifted it between them, watching as it began to glow with ancient power. "I, Nyara, Queen of the Astrian Empire, sovereign of the three suns, guardian of the eternal flame, do hereby renounce my crown, my titles, and my marriage bonds." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "Let it be recorded that I go willingly, that no blood need be shed for this transition." The orb pulsed once, brightly, then crumbled to dust between them. Nyara felt the weight of her royal connections dissolve, leaving her feeling hollow and light, untethered from the only life she'd known for a millennium. Varric stepped back, already distancing himself. "A ship awaits in the lower hangar. You'll be given provisions and a small estate in the outer reaches. The Council suggests the Nephra system, it's remote but habitable." How thoughtful of them. Nyara moved past him toward the door, her steps measured. At the threshold, she paused but didn't turn. "I hope your next queen gives you everything I couldn't, Varric. I hope the price of legacy proves worth its cost." She walked away before he could respond, her head high as she passed the guards and courtiers who lined the halls. They bowed as she passed, one last gesture of respect before she became no one. Nyara memorized every detail of her home as she made her final journey through it, the way starlight played through the crystal walls, the soft hum of the ancient power systems, the subtle fragrance of night-blooming flowers in the royal gardens. As she boarded the ship that would carry her into exile, Nyara allowed herself one last look at the palace that had been her home for a millennium. Then she turned away, facing the darkness of space that awaited her. She was no longer a queen, no longer a wife, no longer bound by the traditions that had finally broken her. She was simply Nyara, and for the first time in 500 years, she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. A stranger among stars. 3 months into her exile, Nyara had learned that survival required more than royal knowledge. The Nephra system's harsh environment had stripped away her royal pretenses, leaving only determination in their wake. Her once ornate robes had been replaced by practical synthetics, her elaborate hairstyle simplified to a practical braid. The small estate provided by the Council had proven to be little more than a reinforced shelter against the planet's frequent ion storms. Tonight, another such storm raged outside. Nyara sat in her observation room, monitoring the security feeds more out of habit than necessity. No one ventured this far into the outer reaches willingly. The planet's twin moons cast a pale green light through the storm shields, creating shifting patterns on the floor that reminded her of palace celebrations she'd never see again. The proximity alarm shattered her melancholy reflection. Something was entering the atmosphere, and from the erratic trajectory, it wasn't a planned arrival. Nyara enhanced the feed, watching as a small vessel fought against the planet's gravity. Its design was unlike anything in the Astrian database, more compact than their sleek ships, with angles that spoke of different engineering principles entirely. The ship was going to crash, and it would land less than a kilometer from her shelter. Nyara hesitated. The prudent choice would be to ignore it. She was in exile. Involvement in any interstellar incident could give the Council an excuse to push her even further from the Empire's borders. But as she watched the ship's desperate descent, she remembered countless diplomatic missions where she'd chosen compassion over convenience. She was no longer a queen, but perhaps she could still be a savior. Grabbing her emergency kit and environmental suit, Nyara rushed out into the storm. The ion-charged atmosphere made her skin tingle even through the protection, and the winds tried to push her off course. But she'd learned to navigate these conditions, using her natural ability to sense energy fields to plot the safest path. The ship crashed with an impact that shook the ground, scattering debris across the rocky terrain. As Nyara approached, she saw that much of the hull had survived. Whoever had designed it had prioritized durability over aesthetics. Smoke poured from several ruptures, but the core structure seemed intact. She found the entry hatch and pressed her hand against it, sending a pulse of energy through the mechanism. It resisted at first, then grudgingly slid open. Inside, emergency lights cast red shadows across unfamiliar technology. And there, strapped into a pilot's chair, was a creature she'd only seen in historical archives. A human. He was unconscious, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. His skin was a shade she'd never seen on a sentient being, not luminescent like her people, but opaque and warm-toned. Dark hair fell across his face, and his breathing was shallow but steady. Nyara checked his vital signs using her emergency kit, grateful that the basic principles of biology remained consistent across species. He was stable but needed treatment. The storm was intensifying, she'd have to bring him back to her shelter. It took all her strength to carry him through the worsening weather. The human was heavier than he looked, his dense muscle structure so different from Astrian physiology. By the time they reached her shelter, Nyara's arms ached and her energy reserves were dangerously low. She placed him on her medical bed, activating the diagnostic systems. As the scanners worked, she studied his features more closely. There was a ruggedness to him that spoke of a life lived in action rather than ceremony. His clothes were functional, with insignias she didn't recognize, and he carried no weapons, unusual for someone traveling through this dangerous sector. The scanner beeped, displaying its results. Multiple contusions, a mild concussion, but nothing life-threatening. His genetic structure appeared on the screen, and Nyara found herself fascinated. Humans were supposed to be a primitive species, barely capable of interstellar travel. Yet here was one, in a ship more advanced than its species should possess, carrying genetic markers that hinted at deliberate engineering. The human stirred, his eyes fluttering open. They were a startling shade of gray, like the storms outside. He tried to sit up but fell back with a groan. "Easy," Nyara said in universal common, hoping he'd understand. "You've been injured." His eyes focused on her, widening in surprise but showing no fear. Where am I?" His voice was rough but his universal common was perfect, another surprise. "The Nephra system, in the outer reaches of the Astrian Empire." Nyara administered a mild painkiller through the medical bed systems. "Your ship crashed during an ion storm. I brought you to my shelter." He processed this information, his gaze taking in her alien features with remarkable composure. "Commander Thomas Wells, Earth Deep Space Initiative." He managed a weak smile. "Though I'm pretty far off course if I'm in Astrian space." "You're even further than you think," Nyara replied. "The Nephra system isn't exactly a tourist destination. It's where the Empire sends its." She paused, choosing her words carefully, "its unwanted elements." Thomas studied her face more intently. "You don't strike me as an unwanted element." "Appearances can be deceiving, Commander Wells." Nyara checked his vital signs again, noting how quickly his body was responding to treatment. "Rest now. The storm will last through the night, and you'll need your strength to deal with whatever brought you to this corner of space." He seemed about to argue but winced as he tried to move again. "Thank you," he said instead. "For saving my life. I'm in your debt." "Nyara," she supplied, omitting her former titles. "Just Nyara." As Thomas drifted back to sleep, Nyara returned to her observation room. She pulled up everything she could find about humans in the databases she still had access to. Most of it was centuries old, dismissing them as an isolated species too fractious to achieve true interstellar capability. Clearly, something had changed. The question was whether that change would bring more trouble to her exile, or perhaps something she hadn't dared hope for in centuries, a chance at a new beginning. Outside, the storm raged on, but for the first time since her exile began, Nyara felt truly awake. Hidden strengths. Weeks passed, and Thomas's presence transformed Nyara's shelter from a place of exile into something that almost felt like home. As he recovered, he proved to be both resourceful and curious, helping her modify the shelter's systems with human engineering techniques that were surprisingly elegant in their simplicity. "Your people really built all this without quantum networking?" Nyara asked one evening as they worked on improving the shelter's power distribution. The twin moons cast their usual green glow through the reinforced windows, but tonight it seemed less lonely. Thomas smiled as he connected another power cell. Humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. When you can't rely on advanced technology, you learn to be creative. Nyara watched him work, fascinated by how his hands moved with such precision despite their apparent clumsiness. Everything about him challenged her preconceptions about humans. He was intelligent, adaptable, and possessed a quiet strength that had nothing to do with physical power. "You still haven't told me what brought you to this sector," she said, passing him a tool before he could ask for it. They'd developed an easy rhythm over the past weeks, anticipating each other's needs. Thomas's hands stilled for a moment. "Would you believe me if I said I was looking for you?" Nyara's bioluminescent markings flickered with surprise. "Me? Why would Earth's Deep Space Initiative be interested in an exiled Astrian?" "Not you specifically," he clarified, resuming his work. "But someone like you. We've been monitoring the Empire's communication channels. We know your people are facing a crisis, genetic degradation affecting your ability to reproduce." The words hit Nyara like a physical blow. "That's highly classified information. How did you dash?" "Because we've solved it," Thomas interrupted, turning to face her. 50 years ago, humans faced a similar crisis. Solar radiation had damaged our genetic code. We were looking at extinction within generations. But we found a solution: genetic adaptability through controlled mutation. Nyara's scientific training warred with her disbelief. "That's impossible. Genetic engineering on that scale would take centuries to perfect." "Unless," Thomas said softly, "you had help from someone who'd already done it. Someone whose species had faced and overcome similar challenges." The implication staggered her. "You're saying there are other advanced species out there? Beyond the Empire's borders?" "The galaxy is bigger than the Empire imagines." Thomas reached into his pocket and withdrew a small device, activating it to project a holographic map. "There's an alliance of species, we call it the Concordat. Each member has faced extinction and evolved past it. We help others do the same." Nyara studied the map, recognizing only a fraction of the systems it showed. "Why tell me this now?" "Because you're not just an exile, Nyara. You're proof that the Empire needs help. Your genetic condition? It's not a flaw, it's the first sign of natural adaptation. Your body is trying to evolve, but the Empire's obsession with genetic purity is fighting against it." The revelation shook her to her core. All those years of feeling broken, of being treated as a failure. The Council would never accept help from outsiders. They barely acknowledge other species as equals. Which is why we need someone they'll listen to. Someone who understands both tradition and the need for change. Thomas's gray eyes met hers. Someone like a former queen. Before Nyara could respond, the shelter's alarms blared. They rushed to the observation room, where the monitors showed multiple ships entering the atmosphere, Astrian Imperial vessels. "They're not supposed to patrol this sector," Nyara said, her mind racing. Unless they detected my ship's energy signature," Thomas finished. "I knew the risk when I came here, but I had to try." Nyara's hands flew over the control panel, assessing their options. "The ion storms have damaged your ship beyond repair. Even if we could reach it there's another way." Thomas pulled out another device, smaller than the first. "The Concordat left me an emergency extraction option, but it'll only work for a few minutes during the next ion storm." He checked the atmospheric readings. "Which is due in less than an hour. You want us to escape?" Nyara's markings pulsed with anxiety. "If we're caught, it would mean execution for both of us. If we stay, your people will continue down a path to extinction." Thomas took her hand, his warm skin a stark contrast to her cool luminescence. "I'm offering you a chance to save them, Nyara. Even if they don't want to be saved." The sound of ships growing closer forced them into action. As they gathered essential supplies, Nyara felt energy coursing through her body in a way she hadn't experienced since before her exile. Her natural ability to sense energy fields was heightening, becoming more acute. "Thomas," she called out, her voice trembling. "Something's happening to me." He turned, his eyes widening as he saw her. Nyara's entire body was glowing brighter than ever before, and the energy readings in the room were spiking off the charts. "It's starting," he said, a mix of awe and excitement in his voice. "Your adaptation, it's accelerating." The Concordat scientists predicted this might happen with prolonged exposure to human genetic markers. "What are you talking about?" But even as she asked, Nyara could feel it, her consciousness expanding, becoming aware of energy fields she'd never sensed before. The approaching ships, the brewing ion storm, even Thomas himself, everything appeared as intricate patterns of energy she could not only see but potentially influence. "Your people's next evolutionary step," Thomas explained quickly as they made final preparations. "The ability to not just sense energy, but to manipulate it on a quantum level. It's what you need to survive the coming changes in this sector of space." The implications were overwhelming, but they had no time to discuss them. The Imperial ships were minutes away, and the ion storm was building to its peak. As they prepared to make their escape, Nyara realized that this wasn't just about her survival anymore. It was about the future of her entire species. And for the first time since her exile, she felt truly powerful. Empire's reach. The ion storm raged around them as Nyara and Thomas raced through the crystalline canyons of Nephra. Imperial search beams cut through the violet clouds above, seeking any sign of movement. Nyara's newly awakened powers surged through her body, allowing her to create a field that deflected the worst of the storm's fury. "The extraction point is just beyond that ridge," Thomas said, consulting his device. His hair was plastered to his face from the rain, but his eyes remained focused and determined. "The Concordat's portal will only stay stable for 30 seconds once it forms." Nyara nodded, trying to maintain concentration on their protective field. Each surge of power felt both exhilarating and dangerous, like handling raw energy without proper insulation. "Thomas, there's something you need to know. These changes in my body, they're not just evolutionary." Before she could continue, a massive spotlight illuminated them from above. Through the storm, an Imperial command vessel descended, its weapons ports glowing with charged energy. A voice boomed through the tempest, one that made Nyara's heart freeze. "My dear wife," King Varric's voice carried the same formal tone she remembered, "did you truly think we wouldn't monitor your exile?" Thomas pulled out a small plasma weapon, but Nyara placed her hand over his. "No," she said softly. This confrontation was inevitable. The command vessel landed between them and their destination, its boarding ramp extending to reveal Varric in full ceremonial armor, flanked by royal guards. He looked exactly as she remembered, yet somehow smaller, or perhaps she had grown. "When we detected the human vessel, I suspected you might be involved," Varric said, descending the ramp. "But consorting with genetic manipulators? That's treason against everything our empire stands for." "The empire is dying, Varric." Nyara stepped forward, her glow intensifying with each word. "Our obsession with genetic purity is leading us to extinction. The humans found a way to evolve past similar challenges. They can help us. By corrupting our bloodlines? By tampering with the very essence of what makes us Astrian?" Varric's face hardened. The council was right. Exile was too lenient. He raised his hand, and the royal guards leveled their weapons. But before they could fire, Nyara felt something shift within her. The storm's energy seemed to flow through her body, responding to her will. With a gesture, she created a barrier of pure energy between them and Varric's forces. "Impossible," Varric whispered, watching as his former queen manipulated forces that no Astrian had ever controlled. "What have they done to you?" "They didn't do anything to me," Nyara replied, her voice carrying despite the storm. They simply showed me what we could become if we stopped fearing change. She turned to Thomas. Show him. Thomas activated his holographic projector, displaying genetic sequences that danced in the rain-filled air. Your people are already changing, King Varric. We detected the mutations decades ago. But instead of embracing them, you exile those who show signs of evolution. How many others like Nyara have you cast out? Varric's expression flickered with something Nyara had never seen before, uncertainty. The Council has identified others with genetic irregularities. We thought it was a contamination, a disease to be contained. It's adaptation, Nyara said, letting her barrier fade slightly. Our children could be born with abilities like this, able to harness the very forces of space itself. We could explore regions of the galaxy we never dreamed possible, establish colonies in energy storms that would destroy our current ships. And the human? Varric's eyes narrowed at Thomas. What does Earth gain from this intervention? Allies, Thomas replied simply. The galaxy is changing, Your Majesty. Energy storms are increasing throughout this sector. In 3 generations, they'll make conventional space travel impossible. Species that can't adapt will be trapped in their own systems, isolated and vulnerable. A massive energy surge from the storm interrupted them, causing even the Imperial ship systems to fluctuate. But Nyara stood unchanged, the energy flowing around her like water around a stone. The Concordat exists to ensure that no species faces extinction alone, Thomas continued. We've helped dozens of civilizations make this transition. Some, like humans, developed technological solutions. Others, like the Astrians, are evolving natural defenses. Varric watched as Nyara effortlessly redirected another energy surge away from their group. And my wife? Was she your target all along? I was drawn to her energy signature, Thomas admitted. But I never expected. He glanced at Nyara, and she felt that familiar warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with her new powers. I never expected to find someone so extraordinary. The storm intensified, and Nyara's instruments detected the approaching portal window. They were running out of time. She stepped closer to Varric, close enough to see the conflict in his eyes. Come with us, she offered, surprising both Thomas and herself. See what the Concordat has discovered. Meet the other species who've faced this challenge. If you still believe we're wrong, you can return and tell the Council to prepare for isolation. But if we're right... Another energy surge rocked the area. The Imperial ship's systems began to fail, its shields flickering. The Royal Guards looked increasingly uncertain as their technology proved useless against the storm's fury. Varric looked from his failing ship to his former queen, seeing her not as a flawed creature to be discarded, but as a glimpse of his species' possible future. In that moment, Nyara recognized something in his expression, the same fear of obsolescence that had haunted her during her exile. The portal's forming, Thomas warned, his device pulsing with urgent signals. We have to decide now. The choice before them would reshape not just their lives, but the future of an entire empire. And as the storm reached its peak, ancient traditions and new possibilities hung in perfect balance, waiting for a single word to tip the scales. Dawn of change. The portal blazed into existence behind them, a swirling vortex of quantum energy that made the ion storm seem tame by comparison. Nyara could sense its complex patterns with her new abilities, marveling at how the Concordat had mastered such forces. But her attention remained fixed on Varric, watching as her former husband struggled with the weight of millennium-old traditions against the undeniable evidence before him. The Empire has stood for 10,000 years, Varric said, his voice barely audible above the storm. 10,000 years of certainty, of knowing our place in the galaxy. And it can stand for 10,000 more, Nyara replied, extending her hand to him. But only if we're willing to grow. Look around you, Varric. Your ship's systems are failing. Your guards' weapons are useless. The old ways cannot protect us anymore. Another surge of energy rocked the area. The Imperial ship's engines whined in protest as its containment fields started to collapse. The royal guards looked to their king, their discipline warring with their instinct for survival. "My lord," the guard captain shouted, "we must evacuate. The ship's core is becoming unstable." Thomas checked his device again. 20 seconds until the portal closes. After that, the storm will make quantum tunneling impossible for at least another solar cycle. Varric looked at his ship, then at Nyara. She could see the exact moment his resolve cracked, not from fear, but from recognition. "You always were the wisest of us," he said softly. "The council thought your inability to bear children was a weakness. But perhaps you were simply ahead of us all." "Order your men into the portal," Nyara urged. "The Concordat will protect them." Varric straightened, every inch a king despite his failing technology. "Royal Guard. Emergency Protocol Sigma. Everyone through that portal, now." The guards hesitated only a moment before following their training, rushing past Nyara and Thomas into the swirling vortex. As the last one entered, the Imperial ship's containment fields finally failed. The vessel erupted in a cascade of energy that would have incinerated them all if not for Nyara's protective barrier. 10 seconds, Thomas warned. Varric took a step toward the portal, then stopped. "The council will see this as abdication. They'll try to seize power." "Let them try," Nyara said, her voice carrying new strength. "When the storms worsen, when more of our people begin to show signs of evolution, they'll need the knowledge we'll bring back. Sometimes, Varric, the greatest service a king can do for his people is to learn to be something new." The storm reached a fever pitch, energy crackling around them like living lightning. Nyara maintained their protection, but even her new abilities were being tested. Together, the three of them plunged through the portal just as it began to collapse. The transition felt like being unmade and remade in the span of a heartbeat. When Nyara's consciousness reasserted itself, she found they were standing in a vast chamber unlike anything in Astrian architecture. The walls seemed to be made of living light, and beings of various species moved about with purpose. "Welcome to Concordat Station," Thomas said, a smile breaking across his face. "The heart of our alliance." Nyara saw her guards staring in wonder at a group of crystalline beings who floated rather than walked, while energy creatures similar to pure plasma conversed with what appeared to be sentient clouds of nanites. Each species had clearly evolved far beyond their original forms, yet they worked together in perfect harmony. A tall figure approached them, its form shifting between states of matter as it moved. "Welcome, children of Astra," it said in a voice that seemed to bypass their ears and speak directly to their minds. "I am Gateway, first speaker of the Concordat. We have waited long for your arrival." Varric, to his credit, maintained his royal bearing. "You knew we would come?" "We knew you would need to," Gateway replied. "As all species do when they reach the crucible point of their evolution. The storms that threaten your empire are not random, King Varric. They are the galaxy's way of forcing adaptation. Those who cannot change will perish," Nyara finished, understanding at last. "But change doesn't have to mean the end of who we are. Look at them," she gestured to the various species around them. "Each has maintained their core identity while becoming something greater." Gateway's form shimmered with approval. "The human Thomas was chosen to contact you because Earth's path most closely mirrors your own. They too fought against change until the very end. Now they are among our most valued members." Thomas took Nyara's hand, and this time, she felt the energy patterns between them harmonize. "The Concordat doesn't just share technology or genetic solutions," he explained. "We share understanding. Every species here has faced the fear of change, the pain of transformation. But they've also discovered the joy of becoming more than they ever imagined possible. Varric watched as one of his guards cautiously approached a group of human scientists, who welcomed him with genuine warmth. And my people? Will they accept this new path? Some will resist, Gateway acknowledged. Change is never easy. But we have learned that the best way to lead people into the future is to show them its benefits rather than force them to accept it. Nyara felt her powers stabilizing, becoming more controlled as the station's ambient energy helped her adjust. We'll need to prepare carefully. The Council will be facing their own crisis soon enough, Gateway interrupted. The storms are increasing faster than even we predicted. Within one Astrian year, your central worlds will begin experiencing disruptions. They will need the evolved abilities you possess, Nyara. You are not just their former queen now, you are their future. Thomas squeezed her hand. And you won't face it alone. The Concordat protects its own. Nyara looked at the assembled species, at her transformed guards, at her former husband who seemed to be seeing the galaxy with new eyes, and at the human whose arrival had catalyzed so much change. She thought of her people, still bound by traditions that had once seemed eternal and immutable. Then let's begin, she said, her glow brightening with purpose. We have an empire to save, and a future to build. Around them, Concordat Station hummed with energy and possibility. The end of her exile had become the beginning of something far greater, not just for her, but for all her people. As she stood there, surrounded by the living proof that change brought not death but renewal, Nyara finally understood why she had been unable to continue the old bloodline. She had been born not to preserve the past, but to forge the future. And now, at last, that future was within reach.